Thank you very much for coming on. I'm really delighted that Scott introduced us, and it's really exciting to have you in my life and also to be working on some projects together as well, which I'm quite excited about, and I'm guessing you're going to talk about. So I guess firstly, it'd be great if we could just kick off, if you could just introduce yourself, who you are, and a brief overview of what you do.
Sure. Greatly appreciate it that you've invited me on the show. It's such an honor to be a part of this community of women. As you probably know, maybe in the beginning of your journey, it's can be a very isolating space to be in because it is male dominated, although there are definitely women. So just thank you for creating this community. So I'm Emma Patu. I'm a professor at McMaster University. I should say the views that I express here are not of the institution. I've been a professor for 10 years and in the area of public health, specifically, my specialty is in health education and behavioral science. And I first got interested in public health through some of the work that I did in undergrad, working with cancer patients in hospitals and doing educational outreach for studies that we were running around the electronic medical record in Toronto. And this was very novel at the time, giving patients access to their medical records and so we were testing to see if it would increase anxiety for a patient to see the results before seeing the doctor. And so I would also go to community organizations and kind of share all the work that we were doing at Princess Margaret Hospital at the time. And I had a really great boss who was an academic. And at the time, I had my bachelor's, and he said, well, you really need to go back to school, right? Like, if you want to expand your wings and do more in this space, in this health education space, you should consider public health and moving forward with that. I'm a person that loves experience, like travel experiences. So I was like, okay, I'll take his word and I'll also think of where do I want to travel next. And so I did my undergrad in Maine in the United States. And then I thought Atlanta would be a fun place. So I did my MPH there. And then after that, I did an applied doctorate in Tennessee, in Johnson City. And there I explored disaster preparedness in American Samoa in an event that happened in 2009, understanding how households responded from a social behavioral perspective. It was fascinating to be involved in such a study because we hired on local interviewers. And so a lot of our study instruments had to be translated into Samoan. And it just like really gave me a really interesting perspective on public health. I was introduced in disaster sociology, which I think if I think about it, it might play into maybe my thinking of why Bitcoin is so important. Because if we look at the need for Bitcoin, I would argue it's probably a disaster situation in some ways.
When you say
So
disaster sociology, does that mean how sort of disasters impact society as a whole?
yes, how and how do humans respond? So specifically, I was using this framework called the Protection Action Decision Model, developed by Professor Mike Lindell. He was in Texas at the time, and there's all these different constructs to predict how people will act in a disaster situation. So they wanted to see essentially the research team wanted to see would the model play out in a different cultural setting. Interestingly, the study was actually supposed to be in Thailand after that big tsunami that
The
happened.
tsunami.
Yeah, but then the 2009 earthquake and tsunami happened in American Samoa, and that was the most recent large scale kind of event that happened on American soil. So the study got shifted there. Um,
Wow.
yeah, so that was a very interesting study to be involved
So
in.
I'm curious, and I don't know if this is jumping the gun too much, but is this? Do you want to sort of talk about how you discovered Bitcoin? Now, would that fit into the sequence of things?
Yeah, that will take us forward. So after I did the study in American Samoa, then I started working at the University of North Florida. And then after that, McMaster University directing the MPH program. So then this takes us to about 2021, when I'm overseeing a graduate program in public health and trying to navigate a very uncertain situation during the pandemic. And it was a very difficult time. I know it was for everyone, but especially for those like in public health care. I mean, I don't have a clinical background, but some of our students are public health physicians, and a lot of them had a lot of burden on them. We had a number of students that lost their placements because health units couldn't take on students, for example. And so I had to find like alternatives for things. And then also there's like my life as well too, right? As you know, in Canada, our policies were quite strict here. And so it gave me a lot of time to reflect. And I also went to Florida as well because my husband's family is from Florida. And it gave me a different perspective because things are a lot more open there. A lot of folks that were probably not wearing masks as much as in Canada. So, and then I started talking and listening to people, and this made me think about and kind of question some of the things that I always believed. And it made me take a step back to think about what is public health specifically, because I think in some ways there's this narrative of the collective health. And in my opinion, there are individuals with health and each have their own protective actions, right? Bringing that kind of disaster sociology language and that they need to take to then, protect themselves and their families. However, one may argue we were hearing, kind of one model that should fit everyone. And so, in broadening my perspective and also returning back to Canada from Florida by myself, I was like, okay, let me just look at my just life and career again and what am I doing? And I love listening to like personal development career, coaching folks on YouTube. And I found this gentleman from the UK actually, and he started talking about crypto kind of as this way of financial empowerment. I guess it was just kind of on my feed. And I learned about crypto and I was like, oh, this is very interesting. You can be your own bank. And I think was it 2021 is that kind of when there was like the price appreciation that happened after
Mm.
the 2020. So I was kind of caught in all that, like, ooh, price goes up, ooh, you can be your own bank. But then I started researching more and I started to understand that, oh, all these other, altcoins really are not solving anything. Maybe in the future we will see that they are, but I noticed that Bitcoin was really the one that was solving the problems with money. And then I realized that it somehow I was able to then think of one of the health promotion models that we use in um, public health a lot, called the health impact pyramid, that the base layer is where you can have the greatest impact for the least effort for individuals in a population. And I was like, wow, Bitcoin is solving a broken base layer, but we never talk about that base layer. And once I saw that, I've been just transitioning to really call on public health professionals and healthcare professionals to see broken money or debt-based money as a public health issue, because it really is at the base. It affects our time preference, right? That's the thing that we talk about in the Bitcoin community. If you are constantly on a treadmill trying to beat inflation, you're thinking about today and not necessarily tomorrow. And so you're not necessarily able to invest in maybe those lifestyle factors, for example, that can help you protect your health for the long term.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it affects the incentive system. I mean, God, there's so many layers to that. I mean, I had a really interesting conversation with a friend who actually lives in Toronto, but she used to work in public healthcare in the US during the Obama administration. And she's of Indian origin. And so she's got very good insight into how things work in that region, how things work in the US and now in Canada. So she's got a really interesting kind of overarching view of these things. But she was saying to me that when they were going through the whole process of evaluating Obamacare and whether to roll it out, they were wanting to look at the impact, because the government, or the taxpayer, I should say, really would have been funding cancer care much more broadly. They wanted to look at the impact of cancer treatment interventions and whether actually people who didn't have interventions lived longer than those that did have interventions. As she said to me, this became an absolute controversial thing for a number of reasons, partly because people were like, well, you can't withhold treatment because it's too expensive under the public purse, that would be unethical or whatever. But obviously, there might be some vested interests that want to provide the treatment because they get paid for it. And if you show that it's not necessary or even harmful, that becomes an issue. And she said to me, in India, we don't provide nearly as much treatment for cancer as they do in the US, and our outcomes are much better. And she said sometimes if you just leave things be, they actually resolve better. So she found that quite interesting, just from a policy perspective, when they were trying to evaluate it, that certain things were just like couldn't be discussed for political or moral reasons or whatever, but also that there was this kind of incentive system that wasn't always very well aligned. And I think to your point about the base layer, I think that's really interesting. So in the UK, we had huge protests from the nursing community or the medical community, I think more generally, but specifically, I think it was, or primarily, I think it was nurses who were basically protesting through their unions to get a pay rise. This was sort of just after the initial wave of the whole kind of COVID stuff. Um, and it was interesting because the UK government had shoveled a load of money into the system to pay people to stay at home and lock everybody in their homes. And obviously, the value of the British pound, the purchasing power was declining as a result of that. Like we saw sort of very high inflation. And the nurses are demanding more pay because they're rightly saying, well, the wages that you give me don't go far enough. And I was trying to explain to this friend of mine who's in the UK, and she was really supportive of the protests. And I said, well, there's some irony there because if they get what they want and the government gives them higher wages, those wages will be financed through money printing. And that's then going to devalue their wages again. So it's almost like just they're fighting a losing battle. And she sort of went, oh, well, Christelle, you can't, people won't understand that. And I'm like, this is exactly the problem. Like they don't understand it, they don't know it. And so they're advocating for the wrong thing. Like what they should be advocating for is, hey, UK government, stop printing money and devaluing my salary, you know?
Yeah, so true. And what's very interesting in Ontario, and I think across Canada, there's been a number of kind of like labor strikes. We've seen it in, for example, graduate TAs, for example, calling for increased salaries. And like, where is that money coming from? And no one is questioning, like, how is the health of our money doing? Like where does that really come from? And if we print more and if we take more from this pot, it's like you're stealing from, what is it, Paul to pay Peter? Like it just seems so circuitous to me, and it just doesn't seem like we are addressing the root cause. Is again, it's like a doctor treating symptoms but not the underlying cause of the issue. And I feel like we're doing a lot of that in public health, and we need to get down to the foundational level and also come back to preventative factors as well too. Like I remember in the pandemic, we were told, oh, you can't go outside, to an extent. And the impact that especially had on children, my goodness, and the long-term consequences. I
Well, also
recently
also to the immune system, because vitamin, I think it was something like you were 19 times less likely to be hospitalized if your vitamin D3 levels were sufficient, which I think it's something like in the US, it's something like 80. I might be getting this, butchering this statistic, but it was something like 80 to 85% of the people that were hospitalized for COVID were deficient in vitamin D3. And there's a vast number of US citizens, and I'm sure it's the same in Canada. It is definitely true in the UK where there's no sunshine, that they just don't get sufficient vitamin D3. But nobody was saying that. In fact, the opposite, like stay inside, don't go outside. And I remember when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening and everybody was up in arms because they were saying, well, we've been locked down, but these guys are allowed to go out and protest and no one's doing anything. And I was sort of saying to people, well, because the argument was, oh, they're going to be super spreader events. And I was like, well, we know that it doesn't really transmit outdoors. And actually, they're probably doing the best thing they can possibly do for their health during the pandemic because they're getting loads of sunshine. I'm supportive. I mean, don't smash up the shops, but I'm supportive of you being outside. Like, carry on. Yeah.
Right? Like, and it's these basic things like, and preventative things. Like what it's in some ways, and in public health, we definitely do, we call for addressing the social determinants of health. But I think our healthcare systems really need to be reimagined and really think about what public health is supposed to be and how that fits into healthcare. So, for example, I recently listened to, I think it's Joshua Friedman's podcast on business Bitcoinization, and he had a physician on there, primary care physician, and he said that he focuses his practice on low preference behaviors, and he's been able to reduce his client load from 6,000 patients to 600. And he has a membership model. Yes, he has a membership model, and his patients have direct contact with him. He's been able to reduce diabetes or reverse it rather in some cases, because he's able to then connect people to like that nutritionist. He's able to have time with his patients to really understand what the underlying cause is, not just have this 2-minute visit and then send them out and prescribe a drug. He realizes that, oh, let me start with the foundations of health. So in his mind, it's, stress management, it's nutrition, it's, those basic things. And he's being able to, prescribe, maybe take a day off of work, right? Like how simple is that, right? Instead of pushing some sort of pill, for example. But obviously there are instances where, you need more extensive intervention. But imagine if our healthcare systems can go back to, the foundations of health.
So I'm curious then, because you've obviously got a lot of insight into what's wrong. You've got a lot of insight into what the root causes are. And I don't know whether this particular podcast episode gave you some insight into practical steps, but if somebody is in the healthcare industry, what could they do if they, absent sort of regulatory changes and huge kind of policy changes? What can an individual physician, for example, do, or somebody in the healthcare space to perhaps get back to first principles of health?
Yeah, I think it really starts from advocacy. Like, because, in Canada, I would say our medical systems are quite centralized when we compare it to, for example, the US. And we have these bodies, these entities, and I write about this in an article in Bitcoin Magazine, and there's a section there around advocacy. And I think, and for example, organizations like the Canadian Public Health Association, and there's many like them around the world, and many physicians, many healthcare professionals belong to them and tend to rally around various health issues. For example, you've probably heard climate change is a health issue these days. Racism is a health issue. Why can't we get back to thinking about the incentives that are driving the system, calling out the broken system, that base layer, and thinking through and maybe having Bitcoiners come together with policymakers, healthcare professionals, have these interdisciplinary groups come together, have conversations, let the physician tell you what his reality or her reality is on, on the ground, and let's try and fix it from there. I think people are not talking to each other. And I think and advocacy is not, it's not sexy, it's not easy, but I think that that is somewhere, a place where we need to start.
And how do you think that Bitcoin could be used in a practical sense then within the healthcare industry? Because its principles align very well with that kind of low time preference thinking, like long-term thinking about your health and looking after yourself rather than waiting until you get sick. But in practical terms, how would you see Bitcoin potentially integrating into healthcare?
Yeah, I would think we probably need a more decentralized model, especially probably in Canada. Um, and I would argue health is a local issue, right? I think the local health, let's say authorities, Ontario have a better idea of what's happening in Ontario rather than Alberta, for example. And so I think that if we have local uh, care groups, we'll call them, maybe even at a smaller level, right? Like maybe at the neighborhood community level. And let's say, for example, in Ontario, we have one of the most, or Toronto, the most extensive public library systems, I think, in the world. And let's take, for example, their catchment area, like each location's catchment area, and usually there's a community center there. So why don't we take that little catchment area with the library, the community center, the businesses within them, and start creating some um, circular, maybe could we call them health economies? um, um, where we look at what the needs are in that community and we get people to, let's say, be on a Bitcoin standard and have community come behind, what they believe are the most pressing issues in their community, and maybe having the provinces fund, like there's community health centers, yes, in Canada, but I think we need to revisit what that means because again, that base layer that creates the incentives is broken. So if we could see what that would look like on a Bitcoin standard, because again, people that understand what Bitcoin is, they just don't want to give it up for anything. They want to give it up for value. And so if the community can come together, recognize what are those things that they deem as valuable for health, then maybe there's some sort of board that's able to oversee and have these conversations so that local communities could then improve their health. I think it's very abstract, but and kind of like woo-wooey, but I think maybe that's maybe one approach.
Well,
And I think
that's a start, isn't it, exploring it? I mean, maybe it's something that you could flesh out a framework for and propose it so that there is a kind of a direct set of proposals for advocacy that's like, this is what we should be doing. I mean, I like the decentralized model, and I do think that things being local are great. There was a company, and I forget its name now, but I was so excited when I heard about this. I think it was Heartbit or something like that. And then they ended up folding because they didn't get enough customer demand. But the idea was this: it was that you would be able to use Lightning to pay for a physician's appointment, like telehealth. So you would be able to access a doctor anywhere in the world via telehealth, obviously not in person, and you could just simply pay for that session, that appointment with Lightning. And I thought that that was a fantastic idea because you're constantly hearing about, oh, these other countries have so much better health service and it's so much quicker. And I was like, wow, that would be amazing. And it would also be borderless in the sense that nobody can stop you. If you've got the app, you just book your appointment. You know, the doctors have rating systems, so you know like who's had good reviews and good feedback or whatever. Book your session and just pay for it, via a lightning invoice. And I was like, this is genius. But I think the founder, and I hope he wouldn't mind me saying this, but he said to me something like, when he did his research, everybody had the response that I had, but he said in practice, there were lots of, regulatory hurdles potentially to get across, but also that actually in practice people didn't use the service that they claimed they would have used. So I thought that was a shame, but I would love to see that resurrected, and I would love to see similar services, because I would use a service like that. It'd be great to just have an appointment with a nutritionist or, a naturopath or something and say, this is whatever. And they could be anywhere in the world and I could just pay them directly. Um, so that's another thing. In a way, it's like decentralized and local, but also global.
Yes, exactly. And I think there's also, is it Crowd Health that they're trying to do like a Bitcoin standard for like health insurance. So I'm not familiar with them, but I'm curious to see how things go, because that's kind of that crowdsourcing model that I was kind of describing in some ways, but like in a community health kind of
So I think
way.
Marty Bent of TFTC has been using them, and I'm pretty sure I spotted on their website the other day that they had written an article about it. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I think he put an article out saying that he, like, basically talking about his experience moving his family onto that service. Um, so I'll go and fish it out, but if it's relevant, I'll include it in the show notes maybe as well, just as a reference point. And I meant to say as well, can you send me that podcast link, the one you mentioned, so I can include that with the physician, just
Yes.
as a note.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, so I guess that brings me to a question then, because you've obviously done a lot of thinking in this space, about how to combine what you know about the health services inside and outside of Canada, which is amazing because you've got some context that's broader than one country with the Bitcoin stuff. So, what's next for you in terms of driving this advocacy forward? Are there any projects that you're working on specifically, or anything that anyone can help you with? Is there anything that you would like people to reach out to you about for in that space?
Yeah, so I think what's next is education. We do say this a lot in the Bitcoin space. And I think, speaking of decentralization, I think there's going to be a broad market for education because different messaging will and teaching styles and so forth will resonate with different people. And so I created Dream Grad Academy. It's an educational platform and consultancy. We work with individuals and organizations. For individuals at this point in time, we have a course called Bitcoin Problem-Based Learning, 4 weeks
Mhm.
online, that helps women that have heard about Bitcoin but want to learn more and they're unsure where to start and are kind of looking for that primer that they can trust on kind of what Bitcoin is, to the point where they can also confidently buy if, after doing their own due diligence, they decide that they want to move forward in that way. And I'm the lead instructor for that course. And yeah, I would hope to build a thriving community. And this is where I'd also would love to partner with Access Tribe to also, have these women then join a thriving community like yours. And
I will
so
put it in the show notes, but can you just give the full URL as well for anyone listening in case they just want to look it up?
yes, the full URL. Well, essentially they can just go to the landing page of the website. So www.dreamgradacademy.com. And right there you'll see course offering available now, and you'll see the information there for the course. It starts on May 30th, yeah, of this year.
Can you talk a little bit on that context then about your journey coming into this space and what your impression was? Because I think both of us have seen that there aren't as many women as we would like to see in this space. Do you have any thoughts around that in terms of your conversations with other women and your experiences?
Um, I'm just trying to think. So I went to the first Canadian Bitcoin conference last year, and I literally like there's maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 women, something like that. But somehow a good majority of us like came together And
You were huddled in a
there
corner.
yeah, we were actually exchanging phone numbers, and I think the idea for the group was actually for older women first, but then they realized that there were so few women that we just needed to create like an open women's group. And ever since then, we've all been in conversation, and the ladies are doing like interesting things, and a lot of folks kind of like myself go down the rabbit hole, and they're like, oh my gosh, I want to pivot, I want to spend my time here, how do I do that? And so it's been this like nice mini community of ladies where we just share ideas, share updates like when we go to conferences and so forth. But I would admittedly say like the community that you have is, I would say, a lot more extensive, which is great because women can choose their own adventure based on where they are. But I've heard from a lot of the in the group is that yeah, they're looking for ways to grow their sense of community.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I haven't been to that particular conference because I think it's being held in Montreal this year, isn't it?
It is, yes. And there's a Bitcoin 101 event, which is great. And there's going to be a women's panel. I don't think there's a lot of time allotted to it, but at least there'll be some female faces there. I'll be on the panel. I'll be representing
Oh,
Dream Grad
great.
Academy and also Bitcoin Mentor as well. That's a new educational resource developed by BTC Sessions and Mike Cook, helping any anybody that's interested in boosting their Bitcoin learnings and self custody as well. So we specialize
I
in multi custody solutions.
I was going to say, actually, one thing probably it's worth people listening to understand is that's kind of like when you go to a group session, you maybe don't want to ask your stupid questions or you need somebody to handhold you all the way through. As I understand it, what you guys have put together is the opportunity to essentially select a mentor for yourself. And then you can have one-on-one sessions with that person where they walk you through, any steps of anything of Bitcoin that you really want to understand and do. Is that right?
Exactly. Because as you know, like there's so many things to bit like so many things to learn in Bitcoin. Like it's one thing to buy Bitcoin, and then next thing you're thinking about UTXOs and like how to manage your unspent, transactions. Like what? Like I thought I was done at just getting it off exchange, right? But then
They
no.
told me I only had to memorize 12 words. So
Yeah.
true. It's so true because
Mhm.
I also think there's the obsessive segment of the Bitcoin community where people sort of get into it and it just becomes, I think probably for you and I fall in that where it just becomes our everything because we're like, Bitcoin fixes everything. I must tell everyone. Yeah. And then there's the people that just want to kind of get exposure, but then they just want to be left alone to carry on doing whatever it was they were doing before. But I think it's great that you guys are offering that service because it's very needed. And I know that I think Ben was doing that solo for a while where he was kind of offering consultancy, but it's great that he's actually set up a more sort of formalized organization for that. Because I think that's one of the most daunting things for people. It's all great coming on courses and doing this and doing that, but actually sometimes you just want, almost like that friend to sit down with you and be like, hey, this is how you do it. And yes, this is how it works. And, be able to answer all your questions. So it's really like a fantastic white glove service, I think, for that. Could you also just give out the website for that, just so people listening know what it is?
Of course. So that one is www.bitcoinmentor.io. And you'll find a really great website there and a roster of amazing mentors with various backgrounds, a lot of technical people. There's social science and kind of health science people like myself. So yeah, people can find a mentor there that they feel will be a good fit. And Mike Cook, who's the managing partner, he's very approachable. So if you need a free consultation, that's on offer as well.
I have a question for you as well. I mean, if somebody in the health arena is interested in booking time with you for consultation services relating specifically to that, is the Bitcoin Mentor the best route, or should they go through the Dream Academy? Like, what's the best way for them to reach you if they would like to lean on some of your expertise?
I would say for now through Bitcoin Mentor, because there is an offering where you can kind of essentially talk about anything related to Bitcoin. And I would argue if you're thinking kind of, innovatively about healthcare, maybe in a Bitcoin lens, that would fit there as well too. So essentially, I've partnered with them to offer my time through Bitcoin Mentor. I think it turned out to be an amazing kind of win-win opportunity for me to leverage their platform and have access to great resources so I could provide my clients with that, and I could run the course, and essentially that could be a feeder to the mentor services as well.
Right. So if somebody sits the course and then they're like, this is great, but I need to go more in depth, they can book time with you through the Bitcoin Mentor. That's fantastic. That's a really great idea. I don't know if we want to touch on Bitcoin in Canada more specifically, because you're obviously based in Canada, and you and I have both recently joined the education committee of the Bitcoin Coalition of Canada. So I keep saying the Canadian Bitcoin Coalition of Canada. I'd love for you to talk a little bit, just maybe kick off with an overview of the Bitcoin scene in Canada, if you like, as you see it, because you've been in this space now for what, 3 years, very in depth, doing a lot of study, doing a lot of thinking, doing a lot of networking. Could you give your thoughts on the Bitcoin ecosystem in Canada, and perhaps relate it also to other geographical areas like North America, like the US, that you might be familiar with?
Yeah, I think what's great about Canada is that we have amazing builders and thinkers. Like again, you have the BTC sessions, the Mike Cooks, you have the Francis Pouliot's, you have the folks that are in the Bitcoin Coalition of Canada, a number of like recognized individuals. But adoption is at least I can speak for maybe Ontario. It's not visible. When adoption is live, you could definitely like see it around. You can go to merchants and purchasing. So um it's I would say it's in its nascent phases, adoption. Um if I compare it to the United States, I think just based on numbers, they are kind of just ahead, I would say slightly, but I think also because I'm not sure if you know the number, but isn't it something like less than 1% of the world has adopted Bitcoin? Is that the
Yeah, I
stat?
don't
Or I
know.
keep hearing that.
I mean, the measurement is a bit difficult, isn't it? Because they tend to look at the numbers based on unique wallets, but then one individual could have more than one wallet. But then you also have centralized custodial services where I suppose somebody has a paper IOU that says that they owe some, but all of that Bitcoin could be in one address, but it actually belongs to multiple people. So I think it's quite hard really to split it out. I mean, my understanding was that it was actually a very large percentage of US citizens or residents who owned or had owned Bitcoin at some point. So they had interacted with Bitcoin. The number was quite high. I agree with you about Canada in some ways. Although one thing I will say is there was such a big noise about the US launching an ETF, and I was thinking, well, Canada's had one since 2021. Like it had a
Mhm,
Bitcoin ETF. Wait, the UK doesn't even have one. Like it's
mhm.
not even on the table as a discussion point, really. Um, so I think in some ways Canada's been a lot more progressive about this stuff, and there are several organizations that are dealing with stuff, and like you say, I mean, some of the best Bitcoin companies I think actually came out of Canada. I mean, I think Cold Card, that's by CoinKite, isn't it? Am I right? I'm hoping I'm getting this right.
Mhm.
Canadian
Yes.
company. Bull
Yep.
Bitcoin is probably, I would say it's probably one of the best exchange services in the world for Bitcoin, Canadian. You've got obviously Bitcoin Coalition of Canada now, you have the Bitcoin ETF, and then you've got some very, you made a point about Bitcoin thinkers. I mean, people like Greg Foss, who, Looking Glass Education, who's been involved in all sorts of Bitcoin projects. Jeff Booth, who's written really, I think, one of the most important books of this decade, The Price of Tomorrow, which ironically is not really about Bitcoin, it's about inflation, but he sort of very briefly touches on Bitcoin, I think, towards the end of it. And he obviously runs Ego Death Capital, the VC as well. So that's a very kind of important VC in the Bitcoin space. So, yeah, I mean, I think for the population size, which is comparatively tiny, Canada really punches above its weight. I don't know if you'd agree.
Yeah, I definitely think you're right when you share all of those examples. But the interesting thing, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, it's like I feel like the policy discussions now are not so much in the mainstream about Bitcoin as it is in the States.
Am
I
I
mean,
allowed to say what I really think the reason is for that?
hey, it's your podcast, so go ahead.
I mean, I think it's because Justin Trudeau's brother Carl Kemper is a Bitcoiner and they have fallen out spectacularly, and he calls him out quite regularly. So I think that that has a lot to do with it. That there is a deeper set familial issue going on there that's impacting it. So I suspect that that has a lot to do with the sort of political or politicization, I guess, of the conversation, that maybe it's become something a little bit more difficult to discuss politically. And I don't think that Trudeau would like to be seen to be supportive of a technology that his estranged brother is espousing. That's my view. I think it might
I
be more of
think,
a family spat than anything else.
well, look at that. This is the problem with centralization, right? Like ultimately, we should be letting the free market, the people decide on what the best money is, right? Like if you think political money is the best, then let it compete with all the other ones, right? Um, uh,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the desire to suppress Bitcoin shows that the existing system is not working, because if it was, nobody would want to use Bitcoin. And the fact that there is such a huge contingent across the world that is really actively interested in this space and involved in it and wants to use the technology really speaks volumes about it. So, I mean, I agree with you. I'm probably much more on the capitalist side in that sense, that I just think you should let the people should be allowed to use whatever means of exchange they want to use. And I read a lot of commentary from like the US on the economic side, where people say, in my opinion, rightly, that, why should money be turned into a government function? It should just be privatized. We will all coalesce around what we think is the best money, which, let's be honest, would be Bitcoin. I mean, why would you use anything else? Even just from a sheer practical standpoint, being able to travel, not having to deal with exchange rates, I think it would force countries to be more productive rather than just exporting their inflation, particularly in the case of the US, where it's the world's reserve currency just about still. Um, they wouldn't have the ability to do that so much. They would have to actually compete on productivity and provide value. So I think that there are just such a sheer number of benefits, and also the fact of having a global customer base. I mean, I think as a business, and I advocate for this all the time, the idea that you can have customers from anywhere in the world, I think is phenomenal. I mean, the idea
yes.
that you're not constrained to a geographical location, you don't have to deal with complicated payment systems, but there's so many paws in the trough. There's like the central banks, there's, the international settlement systems that we have in place, like all of this kind of fiat infrastructure. Um, people's livelihoods depend on it. They don't want it to end because they're doing okay, or maybe like that's all the job that they have. They don't want it being disrupted. And I understand that, but look what happened with the Luddites. It happened anyway. So I say embrace it, learn about it, and really think about how you can take advantage of the technology rather than pushing back against it.
Yeah, and this is a beautiful thing. Like you're kind of asking difference between Canada and US. Like we could also put other international countries. And for example, I went to Africa Bitcoin in December of last year. And just to see all the builders, engineers coming together, because let's be honest here, Africa has been left out of the economic system. And,
Pushed out, I would argue, pushed out.
yes, pushed out. And, Africa doesn't need aid, right? I think is it Maget? Maget, I think she's a Bitcoiner who talks about it. Africa doesn't need aid, it needs trade.
Well,
And
actually,
so
Dambisa Moyo before her made this whole case. So Dambisa Moyo wrote Dead Aid. I mean, it must be about 12, at least 12 years ago now. And that whole book, I don't know if she's a Bitcoiner now, but I mean, I doubt she would have known about Bitcoin back then. But the whole book is, the whole premise is that like Africa doesn't need aid. It just needs you to trade. Just take your foot off its neck, basically. And that book for me was very impactful in thinking about aid in general. I was actually talking to Lorraine Marcel from Bitcoin Data about this,
mhm.
and she was just talking about how Westerners behave when they come to Africa, and the sort of kind of the attitude that they have towards the African market. And I said to her, I'll give you my thoughts on that, is that we have it drilled into us from the moment we are able to comprehend anything as children, that Africa is this desperate place full of, like, frankly, I'm going to be very candid here. It's like, frankly, like they're sort of portrayed as incompetent people who can't manage their own affairs, and we
Mhm.
have to come in and help them. And nobody really explains to you the reality of that situation, because if you think about it logically, it makes no sense. Like, you don't have an entire continent of people that are just by some weird freak of nature, like, not able to organize themselves. No, it's actually the most resource rich place in the world, and people are incredibly entrepreneurial and industrious. Um, I think Magette's argument, though, is that it's the bureaucracy in Africa that's the problem. And she says, oh, it's nothing to do with colonialism. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. Who imposed the bureaucracy? Like, it didn't just spring up of its own accord. I mean, that's my view, but I don't know what your thoughts are. You're much better placed to comment than I have, having actually been there.
But I would also admittedly say, like, I come from the diaspora. So, like, I am born, raised in Canada. I went, actually, that was my first visit to Africa, Ghana.
But you
Um,
have Ghanaian roots, that's right, isn't it? If it,
yes, my
yeah.
my father's from there. Yeah. And I do think bureaucracy is definitely a problem. There's definitely corruption within and, historically, yes. But where I want to bring this is, like, for example, this Dream Grad Academy, for example, it's supposed to be this global business. And I'm looking, I'm using Stripe and I'm looking at all the approved countries where, I could partner with, their, I guess, payment processors, whatever, to accept payments. And I don't even think Ghana was on there. Like, and there's probably other countries that were were not on there, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
so this is the reality that a lot of Africans have to live with, like this, like, very fractured monetary payment system. And so naturally, a lot of Africans will get Bitcoin, right? Um,
I'm
and
curious.
so,
I'm curious, like,
mhm.
just a quick question, like, because I worked in finance for many years and we had a lot of clients when I was in London who were over in Eastern Europe, and many of them had just become part of the European Union. They'd separated from Russia not too long ago. Um, and one thing that I observed there that I thought was really interesting was, because they didn't have this very well established financial system, they were almost able to leapfrog many more developed Western countries, arguably, because they didn't have this legacy infrastructure. Do you think that that's going to be the same thing with Africa, where it's almost like they don't have to go through the whole Visa, Mastercard, blah 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 system? They'll just go Bitcoin.
I think in some respects, yeah. I think because they don't have, as you're saying, that legacy system to compete with or deal with. And I think another big thing is just necessity, right? Like, if you need to exchange with someone to feed your family and you have no means, ooh, and there's this Bitcoin thing that can step in and be the medium exchange, and it has value, it's a saleable good that, anyone would kind of accept anywhere in the world, well, you probably will take it. So I do think that African countries definitely have the potential to leapfrog a lot of the other parts of the world. And when I was at the conference, it was, my goodness, there were like a ton of like activists, and like Ray was there from was it Nuance is his new or Noans is his new kind of
Ray
super
Youssef, you mean?
Ray, yes, Ray Youssef. He was there and he gave this like very empowered talk about, how Africa needs to rise, and, just speaking the mission of just financial empowerment. And there's Femi Long, I think he's from B Trust Builders, and he spoke about the importance of sharing narratives and telling, our stories and getting them out there. Because in Bitcoin, I think you can argue, if you are probably an outsider looking in, you'd be like, ooh, it's a very like Bitcoin kind of maxi male of a certain demographic. Like, if you're just maybe looking and
Gun toting, meat eating libertarian.
and we know that's not the case. We know there's people, from all sorts of backgrounds, and we just need to, get more people adopting this technology. And just yeah, just Africa is just a fascinating place where I believe that really a lot of and there's you've heard of Manchankura. It is a service where you can transact in Bitcoin without the internet, developed by this
Oh,
guy, KG. And so that's probably born out of necessity. So I think a lot of
can you actually
innovations.
describe how that works? Because I've seen some of the posts that Anita Posh has made of it, but I've never fully understood how that actually works. I'm assuming the transaction doesn't get fully completed until there's an internet connection, or like, do you have you got any insight into how it works in practice?
So I can actually give you a story. The technical part behind it, I don't know 100% how that piece actually works. I would definitely have to do some research. This is a thing that I just don't use from day to day. But at the Africa Bitcoin conference, there was this amazing fair where they had local artisans. You could pay in Bitcoin. We used the Fedi app, which was really cool. And then there is this like food from Africa kind of table is or not table, but section. And so I was there and I saw like the shuttle driver. He came over and I saw him and a thought came to my mind. I was like, he's at a Bitcoin conference. He's a driver. He should tell all of these people here that he accepts Bitcoin tips. And so I talked to him about it. He's like, okay, I'm game. I was like, let me see your phone. And it was one of those like feature phones. I was like, okay. Um, I'm
Which
not sure
ironically,
how,
I think are going to come back in vogue because everyone's so sick of the spyware that is all over your phone.
right? Um, so then I see his phone. And then I was like, okay, well, I heard about this thing where you can accept Bitcoin, you know, not over the internet. And so I was like, okay, it's this thing. But then KG, the founder of Mentankura, came over and he's like, what are you guys trying to? It's like, well, I'm trying to set him up. And he's like, okay. And he like pushed in some digits in his phone. And then Obi from Fedi came over and he's like, I want to see how this works. So Obi's mind was like moving on the technical lens. And he was probably like, oh, okay, yeah, he's doing this and this and that. And that's how it gets sent. And I'm just like, oh, wow, that's cool. And he got set up and sent him some sats. And I hope he was able to like accept more
Oh,
tips.
wow. That's amazing. That's really incredible. So yeah, oh wow. So many questions, so many questions. Where do you think adoption is in Africa then? So if you had to compare it, because I think from what you're saying, and I would tend to agree based on what I've seen from outside of Africa, that intuitively, I think countries in that continent seem to just understand the use case for Bitcoin much more tangibly. But where do you think adoption is? Like I know with some countries, like Anita Posh talks about, I think it's Zimbabwe, it's illegal, it's illegal and that kind of stuff. So there are some restrictions. But what's your sense of like maybe what percentage of the population might actually be actively using Bitcoin in some fashion?
Yeah, I think it, as you're kind of pointing to, it depends on your geographic region. And I definitely think in like, for example, Nigeria, where there's been severe like currency devaluations over and over, I believe people are turning to Bitcoin. I know in places like Uganda, Kenya, there's usage. I can't put a number to it, but I know there's active usage. Maybe if we were to compare it to maybe Canada, for example, I would argue that maybe there's probably maybe more daily, maybe transactions with Bitcoin than, for example, in Canada. You know, in the
Mm.
West, we tend to see it as a like
Store of
saving and
value.
invest as store of value, whereas for, you know, a number of other people, it's medium exchange. So I think there's more of that happening there. The numbers I couldn't give you exactly.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I really think that Africa in many ways is going to lead the way, and I think it might be Ray Youssef that actually commented on this on social media. I think he was talking, I think it was him, but he was talking about Dubai and saying, it was a bunch of Bedouins in a desert. I can't remember if he exactly phrased it like that, but I'm paraphrasing. And in 60 years, it's turned into this commercial hub, and it really doesn't take that long. Like once the direction is set and all of the right ingredients are in place, it can happen very quickly. And I have a strong suspicion that we're going to see that in Africa, just because the natural resources are so abundant, the population is so primed for this technology, that it really only takes a couple of um leaders who are, visionary and don't get taken out by the West through one means or another, which I think is a high risk. But for just a couple of them to be able to kind of set that direction and really see their countries flourish. So it'll be interesting. If somebody wanted to find out more, do you have any insight into organizations or conferences that would be worth looking into for people that want to get to know that region better?
Yeah, I would say, well, the Human Rights Foundation, Farida, she really, I believe she's the founder of the Africa Bitcoin Conference. So I think following any of her work would be great. And you were saying Bitcoin Dada. You had, is it Marcel?
Everyone calls her Marcel. Her name is actually Lorraine Marcel, but everyone calls her
Lorraine.
Marcel for some reason. I think she's fine with either, I think.
Okay. Um, yeah, I would say following her and her organization, I know Treasure Academy is actually doing some great work through the Bitcoinetta. So when I was there, I actually went to just like a grassroots meetup at this like outdoor air cafe, and it was really cool. And then again, I was like, where's all the women? There's literally like me and another girl like sitting around the room. But I was happy to see that there was a lot of like young men there kind of like learning. And so there's the Bitcoinetta, which it's a like a Jeep kind of vehicle, and they're driving around Ghana and other parts of Africa. I'm not sure exactly where their journey is, but to spread the message. I believe the Bitcoinetta, do you know if that started, what was that, in Spain, or was it,
I've got to be honest, I've never heard of it.
oh, the Bitcoinetta? You should just look it up. There's the West African Bitcoinetta.
Oh, I
And then I
will.
believe that was born out of another prior Bitcoinetta initiative, maybe Argentina. Maybe that's where it
Mm.
started potentially. And then it moved to Spain. Don't quote me on that, but
What, so
um,
is it just the same vehicle that's just driving around all the world?
no, they're different vehicles. Yeah, so there's like the West African one, and I think there was that one that I think drove through maybe Argentina or parts of Europe. So it's a grassroots education
Hmm.
movement to try to spread the word, especially in these like areas where it's very hard to reach.
Huh, that's fascinating. Yeah, I had no idea that organization existed. You also had on your notes as well, bitcoinisbetter.org. Did you want to talk about that one?
Sure, yeah, Bitcoin is better. So what is cool is I think at the beginning I said, like, when I first went the rabbit hole, I was looking for community, and I went to the Canadian Bitcoin conference and met a lot of great people like Greg Foss. Like, isn't it interesting how like 1 minute you're watching people on YouTube and the next thing you're like talking to them?
It is a bit weird actually, because my first paid Bitcoin role was working for the Bitcoin Collective in the UK. So they were standing up the UK's first Bitcoin only conference in Edinburgh, and Jeff Booth was coming as a speaker, and so I flew over for the event. I was working for it, but I like flew over for the event, and it was just funny because it was actually fine meeting Jeff Booth, but you have that thing where you're like, oh my God, I'm going to see him in real life, and I've been listening to him on podcasts because his was actually. My orange pill was a Jordan Peterson interview with a bunch of Bitcoiners, one of whom was Robert Breedlove. So I then started listening to Breedlove's podcast series, and it just happened that I picked the Jeff Booth series as the first one. So then I read his book, and then that was really the first long. I think I read Gigi's short little booklet first, but Jeff Booth's was the first proper Bitcoin book I read. And so it was a little bit weird, like to meet him because you're like, ah.
I met him too. I met him at the
Did you?
Africa Bitcoin conference, like briefly. And I just told him, thanks for your book. And, I'm thinking of stepping more into Bitcoin. And he's like, good, you should do it. And like 2 seconds after that, there was like five other people that like swarmed him.
Yeah.
Um, but getting back to the Canadian Bitcoin conference, so like you see Greg Foss, I kind of like bump into him and I'm like, "Are you Greg Foss?" He's like, "Yes, he has this wonderful big like
He's not
personality."
recognizable at all.
No.
You can hear him before you see him.
Yeah, and he's such a connector and he's like, "You need to meet this person, this person, this person." So like I started meeting people and I started feeling a little more comfortable at the conference. And I also met Luke Broyles. I really appreciated his work. He's just such a gifted orator. And it's just amazing. He's so young too.
Yeah, I met him in Miami last year actually, and he had some really interesting observations about women in the Bitcoin space. He's very astute,
Yeah,
very astute. Yeah. And I
yeah.
agree with your point about Greg as well. I mean, Greg connects so many people in this space. Like so many people, if you ask them, how did you meet so and so, they'll say, oh, Greg introduced us. So it's nice
Hmm.
to hear that you've had the same experience.
Yeah, he was fantastic. And yeah, he also connected me like Looking Glass education. I had talked to Seb once as well too. Like so cool. But anyways, my conversation with Luke, like we were kind of both at a stage where we were just like figuring things out. Like I'm in academia full time, and he was. I think this was at the point where he was kind of like blowing up, like with his talent to educate and just put all these multidisciplinary things together and tell people kind of what this all means. So yeah, we kept in touch, and um, there was a friend of his that was starting Bitcoin is Better. And so there was a seat available and I applied for it. And Daniel Hirschberger is the president of bitcoinisbetter.org. And we're really trying to push the message of Bitcoin for the middle class and for financial empowerment specifically. And they're essentially it's new. So we're still fleshing out kind of our operations, but the idea is that we'd have an active place for volunteers to come in and support kind of like Bitcoin initiatives. Because as you know, when you're starting in the Bitcoin space, it's hard to, if you're not going to conferences all the time and all of that, it's hard to meet people. And so we're trying to be like this place to kind of connect volunteers and also have an educational marketplace to support Bitcoin companies and so forth. So that's Bitcoin is Better. Pushing the message of Bitcoin to that demographic and somehow bringing together I would say a community of people that just empowers through education and service as well.
Is Bitcoin is Better a specifically Christian organization? Because I know that Luke's a Christian, and I noticed the same that Daniel Hirschberger's bio on there says motivated by his faith and family. Is that part of the focus for them?
No, it's not. I think it just so
It's
happened
happenstance.
to, yeah, I think so. But no, because I think ultimately the organization wants to reach, all sorts of faith-based people. Because as you know, Bitcoin reaches everyone, regardless of faith and all of that. And we really want to also get
It's
past those
funny,
boundaries.
but it's funny though, because people are always surprised when I tell them how many Christians there are in Bitcoin and they go, what? Because they have this immediate thing of like, it's like a money making scam. And I'm like, well, ethical money. I'm like, Christians don't believe in usury and they believe in ethical money. So it's almost like, how could they not be Bitcoiners?
Exactly, right? Like Jimmy Song, for example, like notable Christian Bitcoiner Robert Breedlove, I think, as well too.
Yeah, I don't know
Um,
whether he identifies as a Christian, but he does spend a lot of time with Christians, and I think he
mhm.
contributed to that book, did he not? He definitely spoke at the Thank God Is Bitcoin conference because I went last year before the Miami one. But
Okay.
then also Muslims. I mean, there's the Muslim Bitcoiner, there's the Bitcoiner rabbi, the Bitcoin rabbi. There's we're a multi-faith inclusive umbrella
Yes,
monetary system.
that's the way it should be, right? Like everyone should be able to just plug in, yeah, regardless.
Yeah, and this is the thing I just find most crazy about the Bitcoin ecosystem is it just brings together people from so many diverse disciplines who see their particular lane as being so positively impacted by Bitcoin that, you know, for you, it's like you came into it very much from a healthcare angle, but now you're looking at all these other things. There's the Christian element or the Muslim element, you know, or I don't know, the educational piece, the commerce element, like people in finance are interested in it because of the opportunities it creates for a global network. So it's quite wild. So I guess it'd be, we're a little bit over, so I apologize for taking you over, but it'd be great to wrap up with just having you sort of give a little bit of a brief overview about what's next on the horizon for Emma.
Yes, I would say, well, the next thing is the Canadian Bitcoin Conference and being part of that panel on May 16th. So if this podcast comes out before then, please come to that free event, especially if you are curious about what Bitcoin is. I think I'm in the state now of like seeing where things go. Like at first, I was wondering, okay, how am I going to tie this kind of academic background with Bitcoin? And I think I'm in a place where I'm doing that, and I just want to serve. I just want to just get more people on board, living on a Bitcoin standard to the extent that they can, right? 'Cause I really believe it's one of the solutions that we have in this like really crazy times that we're in. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a great note to wrap up on. Thank you so much, Emma. And yes, this will come out before the conference, so we can also add links if anyone wants to book tickets and see you on the panel. And I will obviously add links to all of the sites that you've mentioned. You're doing an incredible amount. I'm not surprised, woman. Multitasking extraordinaire. And yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to working with you on the Bitcoin Coalition of Canada's board as well. So I hope we can achieve lots of stuff together there. And thank you again.
Agreed. Yeah. And I don't know if we clearly mentioned what Bitcoin Coalition of Canada is all about, but essentially it's about increasing adoption and doing that, in the ways that you typically would for like social movement. So through education, through policy, that type of thing. So yeah, we want to see Canada as one of the most receptive places for Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think it's kind of overdue. I mean, I think to be honest, in some ways you could argue Canada didn't need it as much as some other jurisdictions because actually things were progressing quite well. And it's been quite a forward-thinking country overall, I would say. But it's great to have an organization that everybody can get behind. But also, if people are interested in understanding the situation about Bitcoin in Canada, if policymakers want to get any information or learn more about Bitcoin, they've got a central resource and group that they can reach out to. So I think it's a fantastic initiative and a great team. Not to toot our own horns or anything.
Not it.
Well, thank you so much, Emma, again. I'm so pleased to have you in my life and looking forward to meeting you in person one day as well.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks again. This is great. We kind of meandered all over, but it was a great conversation. Thank you.